If you're having trouble on Imager getting it to shut up and let you type things because it keeps stealing the cursor, mouse or otherwise, DOM event clipboard events enable equals false. Now let's get on with the subject of the video. Before standardization, the pitch of any instrument fluctuated heavily for the letter A, for the note A, between 400 Hz and 460 Hz. But that was agreed upon, kind of, mostly because it would work. This has to do with the absolute max limits for making the instruments, human hearing, baseline levels that we use based on our human voice, and what instruments you could actually make that wouldn't sound like shit. You can make a violin, but it's easier to make a flute, or tuning a set of sticks on a prop up at the 25 and 75% marks approximately, and then tuning them carefully. None of these things turn out to be exact numbers, and more importantly, they don't rely on numbers. It's not math, it's ratios. It's not the numbers, it's the multiplication factors, and then it goes straight to calculus. But here we go. The length of a second was only developed in the 1600s as a standard. Any claim of any particular cycle per second rate is based on you having a standard for the second and the ability to accurately measure things plus or minus 1 cycle per second out of 400. That's less than a percentage point. You don't have the ability to do that. You can do relative pitch, comparison pitch, very easily. Humans are good at that. But then again, that's the reason that a person with a high voice and a low voice saying the same word, we understand them. Because we don't base it on the pitch, we don't base it on the note they're hitting as the baseline level for their voice. Their fundamental frequency is not relevant. Because the fundamental frequency for your voice, for your chakras and maracas, for the universe, are not relevant. They're not relevant. Because if they were, then we wouldn't understand each other if we didn't have exactly the same frequencies. And that's the other thing. Everybody's voice is a little bit different. That proves that we do not have a universal frequency between us. And yes, I'm going to bring up all of the examples that I could find because they're bullshit. What are they caused by? People fudging numbers or just flucking line. So here we go. The Hertzen reference is a term coined in 1930. Before that, it was referred to as cycles per second, because that's what it is. The first time this could be accurately measured was 1834. There's Felix Savart's wheel and John Schirbiner's tonometer. Before that, it was guesswork and, again, comparison. You can use a tuning fork, set one key on your piano or one note on your violin or whatever, and then do all the others reference to it. And of course, you haven't, most of you musicians out there have noticed, if you're actually paying attention, being honest, using straight frets up and down the thing means that each of them are going to be out of tune with each other. You kind of fudge it. So if there's fudge factor going on, that means there isn't a universal note, because none of your guitars are set up that way. And if you sit there and chop the frets up and make them perfect, you end up with perfect harmonics. But that's not what we're used to, because we chimped out and cheaped out millennia ago and used rounding off for everything, because we're humans. Ancient flutes, Pythagoras' monochord, Tibetan bowls, any other instrument, find them on a regular basis in ancient times tuned exactly to a specific frequency. It doesn't even matter which one. The video will have it in the title, but it's not relevant. Find an agreed upon tune-ing. They never could have intentionally tuned their instrument to some sort of numerical or cosmological sequence of numbers or some multiple or division of it. In most cases, they were ignorant of mathematics in the past. The mathematics is built into the instrument. You don't have to know how to do math. It's not based on numerology. It's not really based on cosmology or sacred, sacred geometry in any of this. It's more related to geometry, but there's a problem with that. Pythagorean. They could have never intentionally tuned their instruments to numerically match up with any particular frequency as a scale base, because they can't. They didn't have that information. This is retro programming. You're deciding in the past. This is like looking at, you can look at the Pyramid of Cheops and it's an exact number of multiple to the distance to the sun. No, it's literally, we're applying the numbers to it, and you can find a multiple somehow. People have done things like, the sacred number is exactly a certain number of multiples beyond a certain frequency for a light frequency. Okay, but you can fudge the light frequency. You can fudge whatever you want to. And what's funny is then even then they make basic math errors and get it wrong. Pythagoras' ratio-based arbitrary reference pitch tuning system, as I'm explaining it to you, is based on any pitch you want to. It's based on using ratios. That's what humans use. The reason the decibel scale exists is ratios. We base it on relative volume level and intensity. The same thing with our octave scale and our frequency scale. Even music scales, there are many more than what we use now, were all based on relative frequency pitch. And again, I'm going to explain this to every one of you. In an actual A/B test, every single golden ear out there that says they're an audiophile fails to pick out any particular frequency. It doesn't matter if it's 430 cycles per second, 431. They won't pick it. It's really easy to prove that they can't do it. Then they just claim that you're lying about the frequency because they know what they can hear. I know what I heard. No, you don't. It's relative. We do not use absolute pitch frequencies. There are a rare number of maybe 50 or 60 people who are able to hear the differences. Plus or minus 1 cycle per second is actually available in the lower frequencies. At 400 hertz, that's the ultimately highest frequency you may be able to detect these differences. Because in their head, some people can memorize a pitch and in their head mix the audio and compare them. I can do this kind of, but it's easier with lower frequencies. Hence, A being 432 or 440. You can actually kind of do that. People can mentally keep that pitch in their head. It's even easier with an even lower frequency, though. What's magical about A? Not a damn thing. And what's magical about 432 or 431 or 433? Well, it's just the right frequency because of, and then we'll get into that. Anyway, Pythagoras' system used any note for cycling perfect fifths, but they're not perfect. To complete the circle, you have to diminish one of the fifths per octave. That's what's said on how to do it. That's why it was abandoned. Making a perfect audio frequency system to do this sort of thing with has been something that has been a goal. It's been a road. But again, unless you want to go ahead and go completely synthesizer, you're not going to do it. And you can ask musicians who deal with perfectly tuned pieces of musical equipment. And synthesizers can do it, especially analog ones that are controlled and continually adjusted, plus or minus one tiny bit of a phase angle to get them perfect. You end up with music that sounds a very specific way. That's nice. But what about all the wood string instruments that sound perfect for it? Tuning to different pitches has subtle effects on the timbre of acoustic instruments, all of them, analog physical objects. And it's useful only if you were to deal with one that was actually designed for that frequency as the basis for it. So yeah, but there's an ass ton of instruments that don't match one frequency or another. They were tuned to a different frequency mechanically. Do you want to argue with Stradivarius? They didn't tune anything to 432. You can lie all you want to, but the resonant frequency does not match up with it. It has a resonant frequency. It's not much. It's supposed to be damped across a nice curve, a nice bell curve, because it's supposed to be. I actually can tell you for a fact. Anybody's, it was tuned exactly to 432. They're lying. It was not. That's like, this is the equivalent to people saying the sun was supposed to be yellow and not white. The sun is how we define what the color white is. Yes, the pieces of equipment around here, if you use them without permission, if they're supposed to be paid for by you paying with a credit card, they literally play the psycho theme. So anyway, here we go. Tuning to different pitches can have effects on acoustic instruments. So can aging them, air pressure, humidity, and 1,000 other variables. And some of them have detuned and tuned up to whatever frequency you want to use them at. But if you actually test them and actually tune them correctly, all you do is accommodate for that particular instrument, and everything's out of tune for the entire band. They were designed for a specific note? Okay, but electronically generated sounds are not affected this way because they're based on binary escalation, not the mathematics for creating music. Music does not use binary. The planets orbiting the sun work out in very closely to doubling each time for distances until you get to a certain area, and then it goes kablooey. But it's great for making a really simple mathematical model, and it looks pretty close if you want to put all the planets in binary escalation orbiting the sun. It's not accurate, but it's a fun way to really quickly math out, your solar system if you want to do one for a video game. I've done it, but the numbers don't match. It's not really that way. Mozart did not use 432 hertz for all of his music. His 1780 tuning fork for A belonged to someone else who was responsible for building the equipment. It was set to 421.6 hertz. None of the equipment was ever balanced out at that frequency or anywhere near it. And detuning effects or getting the thing dirty wouldn't cause that much of a change in that particular direction especially. Bach's main pipe organ was tuned to 480 cycles per second for A. Handel's had a tuning fork that was 409 cycles per second for A. A is not defined as a specific frequency in some sort of sacred geometry thing. And I've actually dealt with people who were willing to slug me in the face for telling them this fact. Most of the things that are being cited here as far as music were made before any kind of numerical measurement could be done. Well, it sounds perfect. The only person anybody could find, I've looked, is this. In Italy, 1880, Verdi used several tunings across his lifespan up to that point. He requested his Requiem be tuned to the 1859 French diapason normal standard of A being 435 cycles per second, not 432. Yes, he did later express a slight preference when he was actually playing this with individuals if they would detune it slightly, going down to 432. He determined this after the fact, by reference point to a tuning fork, because they can count the number of beats off. If you're off by 3 cycles per second and you hit A, it'll go in 1 second. You can do the beat frequency test. And if you did that for the instruments in that room that day at that altitude, at that air pressure level, with that humidity, it sounded better at a slightly low frequency. That's less than a percentage point. Okay. By comparison, for completely different reasons he did this. Not cosmic spirituality. It's the only known composer that anybody cites that is quoted correctly. None of the others were accurate. Pushing numerology and sacred geometry woo is the reason it's brought up on the internet. Period, full stop. Audiophiles, if you set them down, they can't identify 432 versus 435. Or 440. They can't. They say they can, but if you actually do an exhaustive test where you distract them enough to where that they'd have to have as some sort of natural heartbeat, mental pulsation, resonant frequency in their mind that they're detecting, they can't. None of them. Not one. I've only met a couple of people, but these are the friends I hang out with who can dial a phone by whistling, because they can hit 2 notes at once, and they have to be plus or minus 1% cycle set. Yes, they can whistle touch tones. That kind of person would be able to detect that. And you know what their opinion of this was? It's horseshit. And they're obviously capable of detecting the differences. The frequency of the heart fluctuates in this dynamic range. 1 to 2.5 cycles per second dynamic range. That's almost 2 to 1. Doing multiples of any of these frequencies so you can come up with some specific frequency is bullshit. 100% of the time, it always is. There's no steady frequency that can be multiplied to achieve that number you want. Brain waves, neural oscillations, 1 cycles per second to 60 cycles per second. Never is tuned to 8 cycles per second, and by definition it can't be. Schumann resonance, similarly, only goes to 7.83, not 8 cycles per second and not another reference point. Supersonic oscillations from the sun are around 5-point-something gigahertz. But that's a very large frequency range for you to claim that somehow this is a resonant frequency of something else. Supersonic oscillations from the sun. What about water molecules? Same answer, same story. None of these are actually based on some sort of sacred resonance of any kind. And if you sit there and do a bunch of tortured math to try to make this number cram into something, you're ignoring the fact that none of this has any relevance in reality and has no practical value. And again, the standardization for the second and cycles per second testing did not occur in the period of time you're claiming for some sort of ancient street cred for this. So this is a modern mythology brought up because people want to push woo. Stupid woo. Failed woo. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that.